you get stupid people that do stupid things with the dogs. And then, and I'm gonna say this in a room of men, as I've done many times before, when you have a group of women, all my mother's age, that are retired and their dogs are their.
Hopefully she's not listening.
It gets bad. No, my mom's not good with records. She goes through the pictures, but the drama, I don't have. I don't have a fuse for drama. And most women are good with that.
All right. We have. Yes.
See?
Hey, you get your promotion.
Oh.
Congratulations.
Oh, that would suck it. Alter.
It's actually much less stressful. I'm gonna get a call. Oh, somebody fell over and smashed their head because I had a seizure anymore. It's gonna be nice.
Does that mean you'll have stationary hours as opposed to driving everywhere? Or?
I'm stationary, but I gotta be a June 2nd highway to Alpaca and then spend all day doing nothing and then get to Wausau. And two, when I can drive home means I'm gonna get home at like 6 p.m.
Yeah, we used to have, when I worked there, Janesville City Janesville would show up regularly.
Make them leave immediately. EPA is a different story.
All
yeah.
right. You got one.
Custom regulations, and you think, well, that's going to be great for you. They actually get more aggressive when that happens. Because they lose their money and they go find you to get their money.
Yes, yeah, right.
We're expecting them quite a bit.
I believe it.
And sorry I can't make it Tuesday when I'm going to my kid's pediatrician appointments. Deal with it.
Well, hopefully you'll just say he's not sleeping, and then maybe they'll figure that out.
Well, it's the 2-month appointment. I have to do it.
We had guys in the parking lot when I went there cutting free on the line.
Wow.
It was like a week.
We would reject those. We can't take those.
Yeah.
Can't take them. We get in trouble by the EPA because of what you did.
That's what somebody else did, right? All right, here we go. Supposed to be a couple other folks that said they were coming, but we're going to start. Providence. That's not Providence. Okay. Let's pray and we will get cranked up. God, thank you for a day of worship, a day to enjoy your creation, to enjoy who you are. God, I pray that you will help us this evening to increase our relationship with you, knowing that it's going to be through knowledge, but hopefully that knowledge will be open up a way for us to know you better, not in an academic way, but to know you better. So God, I pray that you will teach us tonight, that you'll commune with us, that your spirit will be here to convict us also, and to have us to see you in a fuller way. You are an amazing God, and I love you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So this is in the old book. You should have. Did you ask me about that this morning? No, somebody else did. Chrissy Mingus asked me, because this is an addendum. This is chapter 18. Special problem was what it's called, but I guess it's been a special problem for a long time.
Yeah, it's in my book too.
Yeah, special problem. Yeah, it's interesting that usually whenever he says special problem, that means it's something new that he's added, but this has been a special problem. So I guess it's something that he didn't feel like fit into a different category. So maybe that's why I call it a special problem. I don't really think, I don't have a big problem. I don't have a big problem or issue with understanding the idea of evil in God's works. To me, it makes sense. But I know a lot of people feel like it's a big problem, and they ask the question almost as a gotcha moment. Well, why is there evil in God's world if He created it, that type of thing? And I just never have really found much of an issue with it. But I don't know. Maybe I may be missing something. or maybe just the way we'll go through it tonight, maybe it'll clarify some stuff. Is this something that you guys have heard where people have brought up to you, or maybe you battle with why there's evil, or not so much? A little bit? No? Okay.
I'm good, I've heard it.
You guys online, if any of y'all want to comment, that's fine too. So anyway, I know people bring it up. I remember back in 9/11, there's a big, I remember this meme at that point, which was a new concept, but this idea went around, where was God when this happened? And, someone asked me that, and I was like, well, the same place he's always been. Same place he was last week when nobody was listening to him. Same place he was before that, whenever people sinned on a daily basis. Same place, he's always been in the same place. And people continue to do evil things. So it's not like, where was God when this happened? Well, he's the same place he always is. It's just that we happen to be in bad places. So, all right, so let's dig into this book at least. What he does in this chapter, he goes through some possibilities at the beginning. He goes through some themes, I guess you could say, is what he calls it. Themes in the middle, which are called theodicies. After he finishes with the theodicies, he gets really to the answer, which only takes about 3 or 4 pages, but he does a really good job of it. So let's walk through it. He has a summary. He says, he talks about God's providence and that God's providence is universal. He's already talked about the fact that God has a plan and he's going to work that plan out. But he says there's a shadow that comes across this idea of God's providence. That shadow is a problem of evil. So that's sort of the idea of this. Where did evil come from? Why is it here? Why did God allow it? Or did God create it? Or is there such a thing as evil? All those questions what he's coming up with. I like he has a quote from David Hume, which goes back obviously a long time. But David Hume wrote, speaking of God, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? So if he is impotent, if he is willing to prevent evil but he does not prevent it, then he is impotent. If he is able but he's not willing, then he's malevolent. He's bad. If he is both willing and able, then what is evil? And so that's sort of what Hume says. That is, God should be able to stop it. If he can't stop it, then he's not all powerful. If he doesn't want to stop it, then he must be bad. If he's able to stop it, and he is willing to, doesn't stop it, then that means evil must not be evil. So it must be good. So that's the philosophical pathway that David Hume takes with it. Now, as we consider this concept, we know that evil is here. We know that evil actions. Go ahead. I'm gonna step into this a lot tonight because I'm just gonna say it out of habit, I guess. But I'll end up saying evil is this, evil is that. Sort of like we say sin is this, sin is that. Theologically, I don't like doing that. I'm going to try to not do that. I'll try to say evil actions, because evil is an adjective. It's not a noun. Because if you make evil into a noun, say evil does this or evil does that, then you personified it. If you personify it, then you're making it into an entity in and of itself. Same way you would happen to do if you make sin into an entity. Hola. Making room here. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Yo. All right, so y'all have to forgive me because if I do start saying evil is, I don't recognize the bag.
A hard bean.
Never eaten it.
Oh, okay.
We didn't give ourselves enough time to really.
So if like I said, if I start saying evil is this or evil is that, I'm just, it's out of habit, and I'm going to try not to do that, because if you personify evil, if you do that, then you've taken away the action in and of itself. So when we say evil is present, what I actually mean is evil deeds, the results of evil actions. Those things are present. Not that evil is a thing in and of itself. All right. So the evil actions that we tend to see, there are two general types. One is against human welfare, and that is like a natural type of evil. It's a natural aspect, and those are things like hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, tornadoes, storms, those type of things. Things that are in nature, things that are catastrophes that cause large losses of life, things that hurt people and stuff like that. Or diseases. He lists diseases in here too. So the things that are just out of nature. The other type of evil is moral evil, and those are the actions. Those are choices that people make that are controlled by free moral agents. So whenever someone chooses to do something bad, now sometimes people include like war as a natural event. War is not a natural event. War is a moral event, because somebody wanted something, chose to do something, and then that precipitated the eventual war. So war, crime, cruelty, class struggles, discrimination, slavery, those type of things. So moral evils can result from free agency, I guess you say free will, or at least you can push the concept of moral injustices into the area of free will, whereas natural evils cannot be dismissed as something that's free will, because nature is nature, and if it happens and it's bad, then it's not because of some moral choice of the wind. It was caused by nature. So there being that God created it, then you would push God into the one who would be responsible for it. So that's where people look at those ideas of a natural evil. Yep.
On the natural side, I guess the debate that I have or had was caused by the fall, and
Yep.
from moral evil because of us, or is it just inherent?
Yeah. See, and that's where my solution is, because moral evil would start with the choice of, the failure of Eve and the choice of Adam, and that's moral evil. From there, and we'll get to that here in a minute, but from there you get the curse. So God cursed the ground. So you have a curse on ground stuff. Now the weather can then be tracked to the flood, because there was no real weather events until the flood. Well, why did the flood happen? Is it natural or moral? Well, I would say it's moral, because God did it because of the evil that was on earth. So that's a moral event that then caused judgment, which then precipitated all the natural, what we would call natural evil. So I would bring it back to the moral error, and that's where we're eventually going to get to. That's why I say for me it's not that hard. I can go straight to the point. But philosophically, theologically, you have to meander a little bit.
I answered my own question in it, but I thought it's inherent in creation, which I disagree with.
No, it's not inherent in creation, because the world was created as good, very good. Right. So it was not until the moral failure that then there was damage to the natural surroundings that God had created. Now you could say, well, God chose to do that. Well, yeah, He did. That was a choice He made, and that resulted as punishment for the moral choice that mankind had failed at as part of the punishment. So, and the same thing with the flood. Well, God chose to do that. Well, yes, He did, as a result of the moral failure of all of mankind. Genesis 6:6, it grieved God that He created man. That's Andy Hannis's shirt that he wears at softball. They did that to him as a joke. So anyway, that's where we will get to. But sometimes a theologian needs to stir the pot before he serves the dish. So that's what he's doing here. He's got to stir the pot a little bit. All right. Anybody else right now? All right. So there's evil rises. Let's see. So we can look at evil arising in a couple different ways. I don't really like the way he presents this. He talks about a difference between religious form and a theological form. I understand what he's saying, but so what he's trying to paint in this piece, in this part of the chapter, he's saying the religious would be like the actions of mankind. Theological would be, the thought of. And his problem, he says that the theological form of the problem is concerned with evil in general. The religious side is more like the actions, but the theological side is like, why? It asks the question, why we got to allow it? Who is God that he would, it draws into question who is God, because would he allow this bad thing to happen? So that goes to the questions that oftentimes gets repeated. Why would a good God allow something bad to happen? Which even Jesus somewhat addresses this in my favorite way, whenever the guy says, good teacher, and Jesus says, who's good? Only God is good. Or are you calling me God? So Jesus defines the idea of good in that aspect. So there's a definition that Jesus uses for good, that God uses for good, that we don't tend to use. We don't use it in the same way. And so whenever the theological form of evil is addressed, the question becomes, in light of who God is, why would such a problem even exist? And he says, some people have, again, that forms a problem for some people to say that, well, God must not be good. Just like we started off, either God's not able to stop the evil from happening, or he has chosen not to stop the evil from happening. So he's either impotent or he's malevolent in those two aspects. Or there must be another solution. So obviously by the end of the night, we'll have a different solution. But that's where these things come up from. Okay. So there are types of solutions. We're only going to look at two. The first one is called a theodicy. The word theodicy, like theodicy. I tell people if you use the theodicy, you're being very dicey with theo, because theodicy means basically you're separating. Dicey, you can think of it like cutting up something, cutting up God. Theo means God. So the idea is that you're going to diminish a section of God in order to explain another part of God. All right. So you create a theodicy in order to explain the existence of evil. So a theodicy attempts to show that the conception of God as being omnipotent is inaccurate in some aspect. So God is either not completely unlimited, or he fails to prevent a particular evil for some reason. So there's the theodicy. Whenever they present a theodicy, they're saying there's a limitation, although it may be chosen, the way it may be explained, a chosen limitation to God's power. In another aspect, the theodicy may attempt to show that God is not good in the sense that we assume. So they say he's not fully good. And so a theodicy will say, well, God is not fully good in this small aspect, which then allows the evil to maintain itself. And so the process of a theodicy, which I'm going to give you, I think, three or four of these. No, I'm just going to give you two. That's right. I cut them down. So two theodicies. The first one is finitism. I'll get that word out. Finitism. And that is a lessening of God's omnipotence. All right. So finite means, eternal or like no limits. All right. So finitism means that, infinite means unlimited. Finitism means there is an end. And so what we're going to do here is put an end to God's power. My computer's doing all these weird things. It did this to me while I was testifying at Congress last week. It made me really mad. It did. Because thankfully I had a piece of paper that had all my notes on it. I think it has to do with my pen. I'll take my pen away. Okay. Finitism. There we go. All right. So one way of solving the tension of this problem is to look at God's omnipotence. So whenever we look at this idea of theodicy in terms of power, it always ends up in a dualistic attitude. So dualism means that there are two ultimate principles in the world. There is God and evil. This is why I said a while ago, I'm not. If I use it, I am either doing it by accident or I'm going to represent this concept. Evil, though, evil is not a thing. Evil does not have its own persona. Evil is an action or a trait that is indicated by an individual, a created being. Right. So I don't like this idea of dualism. So, but in this created theodicy of omnipotence, there will be a dualistic idea: God versus evil. Evil is uncreated. It's thought of as in this idea, it's thought of as a force that's always present. So therefore, there's a struggle, an eternal struggle between God and this evil power, and within this theodicy, there is no surety of the outcome. Is God going to be able to defeat it? The idea is that God is going to defeat it, and He's attempting to overcome evil, and He would if He could, but He's unable to do so. All right. Now there are variations within open theism. Open theism, which we did, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks ago. Open theism means that there's a potential side of God and an actual side of God, what He's able to do and what He actually does. And on those two ends, He is limited. He can only do he can only do what's in the present tense. He can do all things, but He can only do it in the present tense. And He doesn't know what's going to happen in the future, so He can't fix tomorrow until tomorrow gets here. Now, as soon as tomorrow gets here, He will fix it perfectly. But since He doesn't know what's going to happen tomorrow, He can't preempt it, and we can't be sure of how it's going to turn out. We can be sure of His power. We can have faith that He's got the power to do it, to take care of whatever that is, and He will take care of it tomorrow. But since He doesn't know it, then He can't do it. All right, so within that concept of open theism, they would create this theodicy that says God can do all things, but since He doesn't know all events, then we cannot have faith and surety in it. But while possessing all the power to do it, He lacks the knowledge of what's going to happen. So therefore, we can be sure that the victory is going to be His, but it won't actually affect until the problem comes up. So evil keeps on happening. All right. So God can't ever stop it because He can't get into the future. And since it's a non-created entity, it just keeps on making evil. He squishes it every time it comes up. But since He can't get into the future, He can't stop it from happening.
It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but if you took individual things like when Abraham was going to kill Isaac, and God says, now I know, if you took it at that,
right?
You would say that's what it is, but it's much more broader than that, so you can't lock yourself into that.
Right.
I mean, really, finite or finite, basically you're limiting God.
Yep.
And that's not God at that point.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's because theologians, and I do bust on theologians a little bit because a lot of times theologians are the ones that don't really believe in God. They just believe in their own thoughts about God. So sometimes there's a loss in faith among theologians, and they get lost in the philosophy of religion as opposed to the worship of God. And that's where a lot of these things come from. So yeah, I'm glad you see that, because that's how people get to this idea. And the idea of theodicy, like I said, just theodicy in and of itself is lessening one attribute of God so that you can explain something that in a way that you want to explain it, I guess, is sort of what I would say.
You can't say that God knew before you were sworn.
No.
Before, if you're going to go that direction, now those two will argue against each other.
Yeah. Yeah, until it actually happens, he can't know it. Yeah. And that's where open theism is, or process theology. There's process theology and open theism are the same doctrine, just different names. So, all right. So there's the idea that you can modify God's power, his omnipotence, to say that until he knows it, he can't stop it from happening. Therefore, evil continues to persist. That's the open theistic side of finitism. But you can also look at the idea to say, or some people look at it to say, there's this dualistic entity, God and evil, and they are always battling one another. And so God doesn't have ultimate power over evil. He continues to battle it, and hopefully he'll win in the end. So that's one way to explain out why evil exists. Right? Obviously, I'm not really for that one. I'm not a fan of those. So another theodicy, and I'm doing this because a lot of times people use theodicy as a solution to why there's evil in the world, and theodicies are not good explanations because it lessens the attributes of God. So the second one, since power is one, the goodness of God is the other question. So the second class of theodicies is a modification of the concept of God's goodness. So in that aspect, most Christians, anyone who would call themselves a Christian tends to say, at least by implication, that God is good. There's an understood goodness to God, but within the tribes of Christianity, the idea of his goodness can be defined in different ways. So the example that he uses in his book is Gordon H. Clark, who was a highly reformed, staunch Calvinist. Not picking on anybody. This is Erickson picking on his own team. Clark was very confident in using the reformed idea, and he was I call him an honest 5 to 10 point Calvinist. No, I'm teasing. There's only 5 points to Calvinism, but he would have probably created 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. He was very staunch, and he had no problem with being full out. And this is what I mean. Here's one of his quotes. I'll find it somewhere. Oh, let it be unequivocally said that this view of God certainly makes God the cause of sin. God is the sole and the ultimate cause of everything. There's absolutely nothing independent of him. He alone is the eternal being. He alone is omnipotent. He alone is sovereign. He is the cause of sin. So he doesn't mind throwing all sin at God, because he says, human will is not free. Now, his argument will be that since, and we can go through this, but his argument is that even with Judas was caused to sin by God. God was the cause. Judas was the tool. But yet God doesn't sin, because whatever God caused to happen is not evil. It must be good. So his 3 steps would be: whatever happens is caused by God. Whatever is caused by God is good. Therefore, whatever happens is good. That's the argument that Clark, a very solid Christian, highly reformed, that's his argument, right? Because God did it, therefore it's good. So if God, kills 1 million babies, then that's a good thing. That was good. That was actually good. Now that Yeah, he used another example. If God causes an evil act such as a drunken man shooting his family, God was not, God caused that, but God's not at fault for doing that because it was actually good. God does not sin, even though he's responsible for the sinful act. But in this term, in this idea, the term goodness goes through such a change from what we understand God's goodness to be that's really untenable. Because we just looked at a whole list of attributes that describe God's goodness, and that type of explanation of God's goodness, that type of modification, as the terminology is, that modification of God's goodness it just goes too far. It's untenable. You can't hold that and hold to the attributes of God as the Bible presents the attributes of God. So I don't think you can use either one of those. The arguments for theodicy of power or theodicy of goodness, I don't think they answer. I don't think they answer properly. Okay.
In the second one, there's no evil at all.
Right.
There's no such thing as evil.
Yep. Which in Erickson's book, the very next piece is the denial of evil itself. Because if you take either of these to be truthful, what you have to come to is that evil does not exist. Because that sort of drives you. If God's not at fault, but yet he caused it, then there must not be evil.
I'm gonna say where.
Yeah, you're perfect. You're hitting them. So this actually takes you into the concept of pantheism, because that's what pantheism is. God is all things. And so since there is evil, that means God is also evil. But nobody wants to say that. So you can't say God is evil. So you say evil doesn't exist. That way you can say God is just all things.
We're using sovereignty as their basis to go to. God's going to do whatever it takes, bar and go against what we consider right, evil, and wrong to get his sovereignty. Because he'll take whatever Herod or anybody and say, well, he allowed that, pushed that, did that.
Mhm.
That would be a really poor justification, but it seems to me that's what they're doing. They're taking sovereignty as God's will.
Mhm.
He's going to take whatever it takes to get there, even if it's evil.
Yep. And that's exactly what they say. And so what they end up creating in that aspect is more of a Quranic God, a Muslim God, which is a pernicious God, someone who changes his, doesn't have a moral code, doesn't have a line of righteousness. He more just does whatever it takes to get his job done, his idea done. Does that make sense? Is that sort of what you were saying?
Yeah.
Because his sovereignty overrules righteousness.
Yeah, I think a staunch Reformed Baptist voting bottom would disagree with that guy's writing. He would not agree with that.
Yeah, it is a problem within the Reformed camp, and I think that's why Erickson uses this guy, because I think so there's a term like a honest Calvinist, and they use it for themselves. I'm trying to think of some. There's some. I don't want to misspeak, but I'm thinking that I actually like him now. I used to not, but his church in Los Angeles stood up against the California state law during COVID. John MacArthur, and some others that titled themselves honest Calvinists, that don't mind wearing that idea that God is the cause of evil. And some people write a little bit more tenuously about it. Some are very open about it, because if there is an argument, there's a difficulty in getting out of that argument. At some point, you have to stop the argument. Otherwise, you will drive yourself into God is the cause of all evil. If you drive yourself into that direction, I think that's why Erickson uses this guy, because he wrote so vociferously unashamedly about that aspect of the sovereignty of God, saying he controls every single thing. So he made Satan. That's what he commanded that would happen. Evil, he commanded that it would all happen. Everything's bad, God caused, because of his sovereignty, and you can't judge God because of his sovereignty. And I think that puts things upside down. I don't think sovereignty is what rules God. I think it's more of a righteousness that rules God. And if you take that much power into sovereignty, exactly what you said, if that's a controlling aspect, then you violate his righteousness, his goodness, and holiness and all those other pieces.
And a, to some extent, I have never been taught that though. I've never heard this portion of it.
Right.
And never been taught that in my years.
Because most of the time in churches that doesn't sing. Because everybody, they look at it and go, no, I'm not going to follow that. But theologically and logically, when you walk down that path, at some point you have to stop, right? But once that logic ball starts rolling downhill, you can't. And that's why, like I said, like an honest Calvinist, he takes the logic all the way to the end and doesn't apologize about it. And that's what we tend to get taught is a variation of, and he has a term for it. What does he call it? Complementary reformism or something like that. And that is 5-point Calvinists or totally reformed without going to that utter end of God controlling all evil. But the problem is, which he then identifies it, and this is in a previous chapter, he identified it and saying, basically, I know that this is a logical problem, but this can apply to God. And my question is, well, then why do you hold the position if you have to stop the logical train? So, but anyway, he's just giving that as an example. I don't think any of these examples work, but he's going down the list like a spectrum of how do people believe, or what are some of the beliefs that people have to solve the idea of evil in the world. And this is one that some people use. So,
Well, and if you took it in a simple sense, when people think of evil or they think of God, and God created everything, everything means everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to stop there too, right?
Mm-hmm.
The rest of us to go, if God created everything, then he created evil, he created sin, he
Mm-hmm.
created the devil, and that's where some people simply stop at and go, well, hold a second.
Mm-hmm.
You can have it both ways, you guys. You can either say God did or he didn't, but then either way gets you in trouble. At least the discussions I've had with a few people on that.
Well, thankfully, we'll give you a solution this evening. Yeah, because that's where people argue, and that's why I always get back to the point that evil is not an entity. Evil is an action. Okay, evil does not have its own pulse. Evil is not a created being. Evil is an outcome by moral agents that have chosen to do something. Right? So it's not that God created evil, because evil does not exist. Y'all get what I'm saying? I'm not saying that evil things don't happen. I said evil does not exist. An entity named evil does not exist. Things that are evil happen, but the things that are evil that happen are caused by moral agents who have chosen to do something. Okay. And now those moral agents, yes, God created, but he did not create the evil that they did. He created the moral agents. Now, and this is, I'm going to skip to the end here, but if you, just the idea of a moral agent, even the terminology, you can't have a moral agent unless there's a possibility of an immoral agent. The whole idea of a moral agent is that one is choosing to be moral. There'd be no reason to talk about a moral agent if they had only one type of agency in which they could live. About moral, someone with choice. That's the definition of it. So if there's a creation of a moral agent, they have the ability to choose to do something good, to do something bad. That action that they did was bad. That is evil action, not evil as an entity. God didn't create evil. God didn't create sin. Sin is something that people commit. Evil is something that people do. God didn't make those things. He made the people that do those things. And that's what we're going to get to, is why did he create them with the moral freedom to do those things? Or did he create them with the moral freedom to do that? And that's where that last argument stands, is yes, God created the people, but he did not give them the moral freedom to act. They were constrained to act in a way that they had to act. So God did not create moral beings. He created beings. He didn't create angels with the choice to do good or to do bad. He created a designed agent in an angel that had to do this thing. So that's the distinguishing feature in this in that last concept. Does that make sense? Does that help a little bit?
What's the relationship though? Like, what's the difference with what I hear you saying between sin and evil?
Okay, so I think you'd say all evil is probably sin, but all sin is probably not evil. I think maybe I could say something like that. An evil action is something that does something inherently bad against somebody else. I think that would always be a sin. But you can commit a sin without doing an evil action, I think.
Also,
Honey, do I look good in this dress?
Still alive.
Exactly. It's a sin, but was it evil? That's my point. You said, how could you sin without being
One
evil?
way or another?
Now, if she looked really bad in it, then I guess maybe it could be evil. You know, oh, you look great. Why don't you wear that out there?
Okay, I would say when Rhea,
Yeah,
when Rhea lied.
Yeah.
Evil. No.
was a sin.
Was it a sin?
Of course, yeah. So that's what I mean. I was just grabbing an easy one there, one that y'all would get really quickly. So that's why that's the only type of distinction I'm sort of making. Sin is something against God. Evil, I think the way I would define it, evil is something that has an impact against humanity. And so anything that has a bad impact on humanity, that being evil, I would be hard pressed to find an evil action that was not a sin. But I think I can find some sins that were not evil. Wearing a shirt made of cotton and polyester, that's a sin. I don't think it's evil. You know? Okay, does that make sense? You know? So that's my defining piece. Okay. Y'all good there?
C.S. Lewis does a great job in Mere Christianity. He really laid this out.
Yep.
As far as like, read it.
Yeah. Several hundred, but yeah. That's actually, it's not that big.
It's not that long.
Yeah, it's
Isn't it
300
crazy
pages.
to, like, on visual chapter by chapter that
Of Mere
it's like
Christianity,
Chalkboard
yeah.
series Where they write everything out as they're talking.
Yeah.
Actually, a really good thing for enough breakfast also.
Mere Christianity would be great for everybody to go through. I love that, and the screw tape letters. Yeah, I love screw tape. I just laugh every time I read screw tape. So yeah, Ariel just finished screw tape. Anyway, so that drives us into, I think you were just taking us into the denial of evil. That's the third solution to the problem. I sort of already covered it. This viewpoint is pantheistic, but it actually results from the argument, sort of like the Kraft did, the Clark did in this previous example. That being that nothing is distinguishable from the actions of God, God being all things, pantheism. God is all things. And since nothing is distinguishable from God, then all actions, therefore, are God. And if all actions are God, then evil and good, if you were trying to define them, would be absorbed in God. So therefore, there is no evil because all things are God. Or as a non-pantheist would say, all things are from God. So just a denial of evil in and of itself. So those are some examples. Just the idea of theodicy is that you're overemphasizing one type of evil to the neglect of others. You're overemphasizing one piece of God's omnipotence or his goodness in order to diminish a different one, in order to let the evil be explained away. All right. So in all of these examples, as y'all have noticed, and I've seen it in your faces and heard you, God's greatness, God's goodness, the existence of evil, all those things, to try to explain them in these ways, the cost is too high. The resultant teaching about who God is, about his character, is too destructive to the biblical record and I'm not saying, the God that I have in my mind, that's just not who he is. No, I'm saying it's destructive to the biblical record. What the Bible says about God, what God has proclaimed about himself, does not go along with these theodicy pieces. It just doesn't match up. So the cost is too high to go along that route. Brian, you seem like you had something that you want to say.
No, it just gets real complex. When you start digging through this, there's so many arguments that can pull you and cut you both ways. And it's not as simplified as we'd like to make it, dealing with non-Christians and trying to get our head around that. It's more difficult.
Yep. Cindy added in, she said, a good description of evil is that it is premeditated. So it's something that is considered, it's connived. It has a purpose, I guess you could say. That's probably what she's sort of aiming at. Evil has something beyond the action that it's trying to accomplish. I think it's sort of an idea. Thanks. All right. So themes for dealing with the problem of evil. Yes, she said yes. I hit it. Good. So themes for dealing with the problem of evil. So here it's going to be several different themes that will actually help us deal with the problem. The others were, I think, pretty obvious errors. These, although they won't be correct or complete, they will start guiding us down a proper pathway. All right. So the first theme, evil is a necessary accompaniment of the creation of humanity. All right. So there are some things that God can't do. God can't lie. God can't be cruel. God can't make a rock so big that he can't lift it. He can't, all those stupid things. He can't be something contrary to his nature. So God, he can't break his promise. All those things that are contrary to his nature, those are things that God cannot do. So there's some others. So basically what we're saying, if it's defined, if definitionally it's impossible to do, God does not do that undefinable thing because he can't, it's stupid. Can God make a big rock so big that he can't lift it? That's idiocy. So when we start looking at these things, there's an inevitable result where we start looking and say, well, what are the other definable things that are violated in this idea of evil and good? For example, God can't make a circle without all points being true to the circumference, right? He can't make a circle into a square. He can't make a square into a circle. So God is going to make things in accordance with how he's defined them to be. So therefore, you can look at a human. And if you look at humanity and say, well, God created these beings in this certain way, then that's the way he's going to create it. He's not going to create them outside of what he's desired to create them. So how did God desire to create humanity? That's sort of where we're going. So if God made humanity with a certain necessity, the necessary accompaniment of moral agency, then you can understand how evil exists, even though God did not create it. He didn't create the evil. He created humanity in the way that he saw necessary to have humanity be human. Right? So humans would not be genuinely human without free will. They have to be able to choose. Now, this gives room for argument, obviously, to say, well, that battles against God's sovereignty. I really don't think it does. God chose to do it. If God chose to do it, it doesn't violate his sovereignty. Now, the problem is that by creating agents of free will, that pretty much guarantees at the same time that they will not always do what God would prefer to be the proper outcome. He knows what they're going to do. His plan is secure even within their actions because humanity can't act in relevant terms against God's plan. But they will still do things against God's desired outcome for them. So, so whenever God creates mankind so they can fully exercise their humanity, then if God were to prevent evil from happening, he would have to take away humanity's human nature. So genuine humanity requires the ability to desire, to have things, to do things. Some of those things being contrary to God's intent. Apparently, since God created mankind, it was better to make human beings than it was to make androids. It was better to make human beings than robots, and so he chose um, the moral agency and the ability of man to choose no, as opposed to making robots who would always have to default to yes, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. You computer guys know that. So therefore, the possibility of evil became a necessary accompaniment to God's plan to make someone fully human.
Why a relationship?
The possibility of a relationship, a true relationship, as opposed to a programmed entity. Right. So God created in such a way that the goodness that he created on days 1 through had the potential to be messed up on day 8. And then to be flooded on day whatever. So the question, Erickson brings up the question, he said, if God could not create the world without the accompanying possibility of evil, then why did he create it at all? Or why did he not create the world, instead just create the world without human beings? So it's a valid question. There's no reason for God to create. It's not like he's in need of anything. He didn't have to have. It doesn't make him, if you have infinite glory, then having people praise you doesn't add to your glory. Having infinite worth, having people give you offerings of prayer and it doesn't increase your worth. So it doesn't make God greater. So why did he do it? To have a relationship, to offer the opportunity for his creation to praise him because they chose to praise him. Just like he created with the offer to say no, to refuse to praise him. Either way, he gets glory out of those, either side of that creation. Were you raising your finger at me or no? Okay.
Stop going.
I just saw the finger. I was like, I don't know if he's about to ask a question or. Erickson writes, he says, this was evidently a greater good than to introduce humans into a totally antiseptic environment from which even the logical possibility of desiring anything contrary to God's will would have been excluded. I like that line because I think that the sort of, it pitches the necessary statement. If no human creation could make a choice that was against God's will, desire, I should say, in that aspect, then it's totally an antiseptic environment. I like what he says. Logical possibility of desiring anything contrary to God's will would have been excluded. That is what God would have had to have done to prevent that from happening. Now that being the case, I don't think that gives any glory at all to God, because there's no possibility of having else happen other than for them to do what you have forced them to do, which is not really, it's not a source of glory, praise, or love, or any of the things that we see in the biblical record about who God is. So that makes sense. All right. So he says, okay. So the next one, he says, the reevaluation of what constitutes good and evil. This is a good little section. The Bible seems to identify good and evil in a different way. Now, previously we talked about good and evil, but I didn't like the way they presented that, because I don't think that's a biblical way. But whenever the Bible defines good, Romans 8:28 says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. All right. This defines a couple of different things. For whom does he work things out? For those who love him. So that means those who are called according to his purpose. All right. So that means those people that we would say Christians, those people who are assured of going into eternity with God or everlasting life with God, into heaven, if you want to say it like that. So there's something good at the end. So God works all things for the good of those. He doesn't define a time frame. He doesn't say works all things for the good for today or tomorrow or while they're alive. But since they are all called according to his purpose, this means he's looking in a eternal aspect. So the things that he allows, that he then calls good, may be really, really stinking bad for you, but it works out for good in the end because of eternality. All right. So the way the Bible defines it, then good is more of an eternal aspect instead of bearing with personal health and personal wealth. Instead, it's the idea of being conformed to the image of God and Jesus. And sort of the short range comfort, we have this long range perspective of good. And we tend to look at good as, well, what have you done for me lately? What's today? And so there is a redefinition of good in the Bible that we don't tend to grab a hold of. So when we look at that divine dimension, sometimes the things that we would say are good for our welfare immediately are actually evil for our welfare on the long run. Driving 130 in a car, it's, man, that was good. Yeah. Oh, that was really bad now. That was really bad. So the thing that you thought was good turned out to be really, really bad. If you love candy, if you're a big hard candy freak and you like to eat hard candies and eat them and eat them and eat them, that's really, really good. As a matter of fact, your dentist may really like you as he pulls all of your teeth out, or gives you cavity, or fills your cavities or whatever. So that thing that we may define as good may actually be evil or bad in the long run. So on the other side, something that you say may be good or bad today may actually be really, really good in the future. That great theological church song, some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. Y'all sing that in church ever? No, y'all didn't sing that in classical country song. That's right. Y'all aren't country music folks, I guess. Some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. Do what? You remember a song now? Okay, it's about 30 years old or something like that. So sometimes, yeah. So sometimes we look at the opposite. The things that are bad that we say are bad today turn out to be good tomorrow. So we do need to redefine some of that. Also, time frames. Something bad today, but 15 minutes from now, kids are great at this. Something that is the worst. Oh, that's the worst. I can't believe that happened. That's the worst. But 10 minutes from now, they forgot about it. You crush your toe. Well, that hurts for a little bit longer, but in a couple of days, you forgot about it. There are bad things that happen today that 5 years from now, you won't think about it. So on the long run, the long range effects that flow from it, it may not matter 5 years from now. What about 1,000,000 years from now? When you're residing with God in heaven, was it that bad thing? Was it really that bad? No, because it dissolved away with time, because it had no eternal value to it. So again, the idea of good and bad needs to be evaluated in long term with the divine dimension to it. All right. Now, this is my favorite. This is where I think we get into the actual answer. We've got 20 minutes to do it, so we're good. Evil in general as a result of sin in general. This is where Ethan was taking us earlier. The main idea of doctrine of theology in this book, and also with me, is that the only thing we had to worry about is racial sin. Now I'm using it just because I wanted to poke some fun here. Racial sin. Now, what does that mean? It does not mean race against race. It does not mean that we're different races. How many races are there? One. That's right. There's one race. It's the human race, right? So racial sin means that our race has sinned. Adam sinned. When Adam sinned, the entire race sinned. So we have a racial sin problem. We sinned in Adam. Adam is our federal head, or a representative head. That's what that means. He's our representative head. And so when he sinned, he violated God's will, fell from the state of innocence, fell into a sinful condition. We inherited that sinful condition. So therefore, we have sin upon us that was caused by this racial sin, and it continues. From that first sin, it changed the universe. Death, all of a sudden, because of that sin, death came in. Because of that sin, there's anguish in childbirth. There are thorns and thistles that are going to be grown instead of crops. You're going to have to toil and labor in the field in order to produce something instead of just being able to be. So all these things that God had created in a perfect way because of human sin, in general, that general sin that then gets passed on in general to all of us, caused a general sin within humanity, but also in nature. So that general sin in nature, caused by the general sin of Adam, produces the general aspect of brokenness and sin, or natural evil, natural types of sin, difficulties, all those things that we look at because it's a broken world, all that stuff. That's when we look at and say, well, general sin caused general evil. And now, obviously, if we talk about general sin, we're also going to talk about specific sin, right? But in the idea of general sin, we can also look at like angels. So not just with humanity, but also the spiritual realm. There was a general sin within the angelic horde, obviously led by Lucifer, but a third of the angels went with him. So this general sin of the angelic choice to follow after Lucifer, or to do the same thing as Lucifer did and rebel, that caused a spiritual general sin aspect. So in the same way that the general sin of Adam precipitated into the actual sin coming upon us, and so we live in a general aspect of brokenness in humanity, general sin of humanity. His sin also caused general sin in nature, right? And so nature is broken, and so we have trees that die, and plants and blah 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 blah, thorns and thistles, all that. In the same way, the choice of Lucifer and the third of the angels that decided with him caused a spiritual evilness, and this spiritual general sin aspect, which then sets up spiritual warfare. And so we have brokenness within the human realm, the natural realm, and the spiritual realm, because God chose to make morally free choice, because that was his choice. It was better to give them a choice to say yes and no than to make them robotic. Makes sense? And so within those choices, and with the general sin of mankind, you have the breaking of humanity and nature. With the general sin of Lucifer and the angels, you have the spiritual realm that's broken. And so we see what's set up or results from all three of those realms: the spiritual realm, the natural realm, and the human realm. All have the general aspect of sin caused by general sin, which leads us to so that sets up things like now he puts cancer. I think he puts cancer into the next case, but I would put it into general sin. To me, cancer and any genetic disorder is a result of general sin. So if someone has a genetic related cancer, not like smoking and things that like exacerbate those issues, but a genetically caused cancer, a genetically caused problem, that's Adam's fault. That was Adam's choice, and because of the general sin that is based upon Adam's choice, our genetic code got messed up, it got broken, and so what ends up happening is mutations and changes and bad things, and that leads to cancerous things and genetic problems. All right, so I include anything cancerous or anything like that. I put that in general sin category and put that on Adam. But we also have this area of specific evil as a result of specific sin. Now we can look at that and look at, someone dies in a policeman dies in a crime. Guy pulls the trigger, shoots the police officer, he dies. That's the result of a specific sin. True enough, that person's condition was based on the general sin of Adam, but then he complicated it by making another specific sin where he actually chose to kill somebody. So it's not saying, well, my mother made me do it, my father made me do it, Adam made me do it. Well, the person was born with a sin condition, but then they chose to do other things. So child abuse, theft, rape, all those things, smoking causing cancer, or doing activities that cause you to break your arm, or eating the wrong diet, giving you some heart disease or kidney failure or whatever happens. You shoot yourself in the leg. You did that. That is not, I can't blame Adam on that one. I just have to blame you for that one, right? So any of those aspects, those are specific. That's case by case where the victim, where sometimes the victim is innocent of the evil that occurs because it was someone else that caused the evil on them. Now, Jesus actually addressed this. I think we actually just did this, John chapter 9. I think it was last week, where the blind man was healed, and before he was healed, the Pharisee said, "Who Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, so that he was born blind?" Right. So their aspect was who sinned, and Jesus says neither one, this man nor his parents, neither. Now Jesus says it happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. Jesus was talking about the miracle that he was going to create, but there's a whole bunch of other people that this would apply to as well. Well, who sinned, this person or that person, to make that person blind? Neither. It's not his mother or his father, it's Adam. It's the general sin that happened years and years and years ago that caused our genetic code to break down, to make our bodies break down. What they were living to 1,000 years, and now we're 100 or shorter. Average lifespan 76 years or something like that. So we're, that's where we live to. Why? Because our genetics are broken down. Why? Because Adam. General sin has propagated that. Specific sin would be that someone did something to cause a problem. Paul addresses this idea. He says, "Do not be deceived." This is Galatians 6, chapter 6, verse 7 and 8. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. The one who sows to please his sinful nature, from that nature will reap destruction. The one who sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. So he says, if you're feeding your sinful nature, if you continue to do bad things are going to happen to you. The person who's an alcoholic that continues to drink and drink and drink and drink and drink, and then he has an accident driving home and drives into a ditch. He can't really blame God for it. Well, God did this to me. No. All that drinking did. That was a choice you made. Liver, there's so many of these things that we can look at to say there's a cause and effect relationship in the spiritual realm as well as in the physical realm. Those two realms do connect. So God is not necessarily, people say, well, God's cursing that person, or God's punishing that person because he did X, Y, and Z. Well, that's not always the case. If you sow bad seed physically, you reap bad seed physically. That's not exactly God punishing you for doing something that you did. That's your own stupid idea. I mean, you did that. That's hold my beer activity, right? Hold my beer, watch this. And then you wonder why you shoot yourself in the leg. God did that, right? No, you pulled the trigger. I mean, you did the thing, So, in the same way, in the spiritual realm, well, God did this to me in the spiritual realm. No, the same idea holds true in the spiritual realm. Same way, you sow, you reap. That's not exactly God punishing you. That's a person setting up himself or herself for an eventual result, a guaranteed result, because you put a seed in the dirt and you watered it and you warmed it up and you watched it germinate, and then you wonder why there's fruit. So, in the same way, habitual drinking destroys someone's health. Like you said, cirrhosis of the liver. Some, eating the wrong food, not exercising, blah, 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 cause other heart, maybe kidney issues, whatever. That is a specific result from a specific sin that was not God's judgment based, but rather a natural outcome of the choices that the person made. And so many times people blame it on, the Twin Towers. Where's God? Well, it's not where's God. I mean, people chose to do certain things, and that's unfortunately what happened. There's results. So I don't think we have to look at I'll draw a straight line. There's a problem in the creation of the entity of evil. That's the first problem. When you give evil a personality, a persona. So there's make sure. Oh, okay. If you give evil a persona, if you make evil into an entity, then evil gets to choose what it wants to do. It has an opinion. It has a directionality. It can affect different things. What I'm saying is, if you give evil a persona, you give it power. Evil does not have a power because it's not a persona. God did not create evil. He created instead moral agents. He chose. Now that's the only place where there's a lot viability of a theological argument is, did God create moral agents or not? I think it's pretty easy to see the value of creating moral agents for God as opposed to creating robots. There would be no glory. There's no purpose in God creating robotic entities. So I would defend that one. But if you look and say, well, God created these moral agents who had the ability to choose yes, ability to choose no. He set himself up for the obvious dissatisfaction of people that chose to do something outside of what God's best desire for them would have been. That created the opportunity for sin. That sin then would create the necessity for evil, but the evil is a result of the sin that was created by the creation of moral agents. So the idea that God decided to create moral agents who had a choice to do in accordance with God's will or against God's will by their own free will, he allowed the opportunity for them to sin, because in that same opportunity for them to sin, he also gave them the opportunity to love and worship. If he didn't give them the opportunity to sin, he would not have been able to give them the opportunity to worship. And so his choice, it appears from Scripture, his choice was, it's a better opportunity to give them the choice to worship than not give them the choice to worship. But in order for it to be a choice to worship, I have to give them the choice not to. That gives the road open for the idea of sin. If that sin then precipitates into other people, that becomes evil. Evil is not an entity. It's the result of sin that's then caused on or brought about on other people. Once that starts with Adam, then that was precipitated throughout all of mankind. That means that not only does evil beget evil in the physical, but also in the spiritual. So sin begets sin. So people are born with a broken imago Dei. They're not born with this perfect image of God. So they're not born with the perfect image of God. They're born with the punishment, with the end result of sin, which is death and deprivation and the breaking down of all things. So the earth gets caught up in this. So earth is broken, humanity is broken. Same thing happens in the spiritual realm. So all this trifecta of brokenness moves through the earth, always in the same direction as God's ultimate plan, never able to overcome God's plan, solely based on the idea that God said, I want you to be able to choose whether you're going to love me and serve me and worship me or you're not. And for God, I think that's where That's where the original choice comes from. I'm going to give you the opportunity. Now, what I do like this last little piece in his writing, because he says God is the victim of evil. His point here, and this is where we close up. His point here is when people argue about, all this evil and sin, blah, 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 who's the one that absorbed it? God did. Jesus came in flesh to take sin, to take these evil effects, even to absorb death. He took it upon himself. That's the whole Christian concept of the problem of evil is solved on the cross and in the tomb. Jesus bore the power of sin, which is death, and he destroyed the only power that sin has, which is death. He took it away. Oh, death, where's your victory? Death, where's your sting? He took it away. There is no more power of death. He defeated death. He defeated hell. He defeated the grave. He defeated all those things. He did that by being the victim of sin and evil. He died at the hands of evil men. That's why he said over and over again to his disciples, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, and evil men are going to beat me, crucify me, and I'm going to die at their hands. So God was, Scripture says, grieved, and again, this is Andy's shirt. It grieved God that he created mankind. It grieved God to see man living in sinfulness. But he then chose to then come in flesh and absorb that sin, to absorb that evil and make a pathway out. So again, people could choose. We could have the choice. We can have the choice to say, I want that life. I'm going to give you my life. I want your life instead. And that's the whole transactional benefit of salvation. I'm going to give you my life, Jesus. I want your life. He says, okay, fine. I'll give you my life, which is wonderful. It's salvific life. It's everlasting life. I give him my puny life. And as a transaction, he gets mine. I get his. I get a much better deal. I mean, it's a bargain. That's one heck of a coupon. That's right. Which is interesting because what do you do to a coupon? You redeem it, and it is redemption. So he did that in order to negate sin. And if you negate sin, then you negate evil as well. So whenever we look at that, then once you are regenerated, all things after that, he says he's going to work for good. Right. So here's the last little thing, a little twist I'm going to put in here. He says that if you are a believer of his, he works all things for good. So, in effect, all evil does disappear. We are not subject to evil because he says he's going to work all things for good. So all we had to do, that bad thing that happens to us, we instead look for where the good's going to come out of it. We may not see it in this lifetime. It may be something later, but that's why we have a hope. That's why we have faith. That's why we have hope, and it's absorbed in Jesus Christ. And that only happens with the believer. So only a believer is empowered with that strength to be able to look at something bad happening to himself or his family or people around him and say, yes, but I have faith in what God is going to deliver to me at some point in time, because he's going to work that horrible thing out. He's going to work it out into good, because I love him and I'm called by his name and I'm called to his purpose. And so therefore there's going to be good that comes out of it. So to me, we should not look at anything really as being evil, because God says that it's going to be good. All right, it's going to work out to good if you have an eternal and divine aspect. In the eternality, just wait, because anything that happens here will be washed away in your everlasting life with Jesus Christ. So wait, time and divinity, all things according to him. So
Paul illustrated when he's in prison. This is a good thing. I can, speak about Jesus to the prisoners.
yeah, I'm in prison, so therefore it gave me, I now have a prison ministry.
It's for the good of Jesus.
Yeah.
He's in prison, suffering, and he's like, no, it's actually good.
Yeah. He would never, the Philippian jailer and his whole household would have never been saved if he hadn't been beaten, him and Silas thrown into the pit. I mean, you can even go back to Old Testament and consider what Joseph said: "What you intended for evil, God intended for good." Who would have thought that, being betrayed and beaten by your brothers, being sold to your cousins, being taken into Egypt, sold as a slave, lied to, chased after by some woman, put back in jail, and then blah 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 blah, and all that was for the good. Now, how long did you have to wait for that? A long, long time. What an incredible perspective. So again, I think we can look at things and say, well, there is no evil because God works all things out for good. It takes a lot of faith to do that, but I think that's what He calls us to: faith, hope, seeing things that all things that we may look at as being bad, they will work out to the good. I'm not talking about being the idiot Christian who, oh, this is such a blessing. I'm saying having an internal faith that proclaims that God is still in control of the ultimate destiny of your life, even though the immediate effect of evil on it may be painful. The ultimate destiny is held by God.
They're still evil though. I mean,
Yeah, I was gonna
God
say.
may use it, but their evil is still present.
But do I look at it as evil? Because God says He's going to work it out, and for me, He's going to work it out for good. Are you saying that like evil out on the world? Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Well, and I still feel that's evil. You
Yeah.
get hit by a car because of a drunk driver, it's still evil.
If it sends you to be with Jesus, is it evil?
No, but the act is still evil.
The act was because they're lost.
Right. The
Yeah.
good that comes out of it, God gets the credit.
Right.
It doesn't negate, in my opinion, negate that evil is still there.
Sure. Yeah, and I would never argue that there's not evil. I mean, God talks about evil in the world. So yes, I just think when we look at it, we have to have faith that God's going to work that evil action. And again, so what I want to pick at you just for a second, because you said there's still evil in the world. Now, I know what you meant, but evil is not an entity.
I knew you were going to say that. As soon as I said it, I was going to say that.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. A person did something bad, and it turned into evil, an evil action.
You can't grasp evil.
I can't grab it. It has no thoughts. It has no personality. It has no choices. It's the outcome. It's the outcome of sinful action. So yeah, until you get rid of sin and all the things, Romans 1, all that stuff that's bad in the world, until God gets rid of the world, there's going to be evil actions that result from the sin of the world. No doubt about it. But are you going to suffer from that on an eternal basis? No. So if your time frame is an eternal time frame, then all things are going to work out for good, even if it looks like bad world evil today.
I've always struggled with the, babies born into sin, right? Because I always went, okay, Adam sinned. As soon as they created sin, but to be born into sin makes me feel that they're evil to begin with and they're not, or sinful to begin with.
Sinful,
Not
yeah.
Sinful. Again, I'm getting in trouble here pretty
No. I hear you.
It's the act then of what they did then now be used into evil or the sin born into this world doesn't make them.
Again, sin doesn't make you evil because you're a giving entity. It makes you born into sin or born with a broken image of God. The Imago Dei is not filled with the Spirit. It has not become alive. Ephesians chapter 2, you're born dead in your trespasses and sin. I mean, that part of you, your spiritual life is dead. Now, is there any physical blame put on the child? No. And I've talked about this before. I think there's plenty of good arguments that can be made, scriptural arguments that can be made that there is some point of accountability for a person, whether God places that guilt on that person or not. He's the one that's judging. He's the one that gets to make that choice. We are born broken and guilty. Would he be justified by condemning them? Of course, yes, he's justified in anything and all things. But do we see evidence in Scripture that he has a separate case for them? Yeah, we do. And I can be pretty confident of it.
I struggle on that fact of Adam and Eve and the complexity of it. With, okay, did she ever get mad when she shouldn't have? for he ever get mad when he went to. And that sin started at the point of eating the apple. I'm like, okay, where, how to get your head around that whole portion of it, other than just giving it to God.
Did she ever get mad?
Well,
You mean
for instance,
before the sin?
yeah, that she said before the sin.
Well, they didn't have a toilet seat that he would have left up. So
Right. It's just the more I figure, the more I dive in, the deeper it gets, the harder it is. Other than I give some things to God.
yeah. Well, to help you out with that, I don't think it took very long after the seventh day. I think it was within the first 28 days of their life that they sinned. I mean,
I think the real question is, why didn't Eve get freaked out by a talking snake?
why didn't she?
Well, it wasn't that snake that they're talking about. It was
It was serpent. It was serpent, but it was on legs. It was like
It
a
ran away.
cat-
The snake is talking.
yeah.
I would have just ran away.
well. Her husband was right there. He should have grabbed a stick and beat the living daylights out of the thing. What are you doing talking about a woman?
Why is that not freaking
Yeah.
out?
Hello, stop talking about a woman.
He
You tried to-
talked to them all the time.
Did I?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Might have been. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the idea of children and born broken. It's a different topic, but it still is part of it because they're born into Adam's sin. All people they're broken. A lot of children die before they ever breathed the first time. They were still children. They were birthed on the day of conception, but they never breathed the breath. But yet they died before they ever breathed. They didn't ever do anything, but they had a genetic problem that was caused by Adam. That's when the brokenness started, and that's the genetic thing that caused this child's death. So sin caused it way back there. They weren't to blame for it, but they were born.
Specific sin or abortion.
Yeah, and then that's abortion is a specific sin that caused the death. That's murder, right? And it caused the death of that child. They didn't have any. They were innocent from that thing, but yeah, they were carrying Adam's sin, so they were still born and then died in sin. But God's choice of how He's going to do it. I guess my point and where I'm driving at is that the idea of God has to condemn this unborn baby. That again built a box around God. Says, God, this is what you have to do. You have to act this way because this is what I've said that you have to do, and it makes me God instead of God. I like to give Him some leniency to say, no, I have wisdom. I have all power and I have all wisdom. I can make the proper choices based on whatever it is I have without violating myself or without violating what I've written, without violating righteousness or justice. I can make a proper judgment. Thank you, Hoyt. I don't think He needs my adjudication. He certainly doesn't have to live within my box. And that is my biggest theological concern, is when people build a box, a system, and say God has to function within this system because they've created something that God doesn't represent Himself in. So
I just struggle with the born into sin and the whole fact that individually when we condemn, or what it says in this book, that they put themselves to hell, right? The very last thing on that chapter is that God didn't send to hell. They chose to separate themselves from God. And I look at individual, you go to hell based on your choice to do so. Correct? So,
well, I would say your choice to go to hell. I'd say their choice not to follow God,
okay.
not to be convicted, to resist the temptation, to resist the conviction of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Which always made me, or then I look at the fact that if we're subject to where we go based on our actions and actions alone, and yet we're under Adam's sin, it just always struggle with that fact, because now we're saying we're under His was that move.
But Adam's sin does not constrain you to continue to make actions.
You struggle with what are you morally culpable?
I mean, here's just an easy way to say it. I mean, like all people are born with Adam's sin, right? But yet you have Jeffrey Dahmer and you have Brian Vector. Both of them started with the same original sin, but their choices turned them into something completely different. Just because you have Adam's original sin within you doesn't then make you make a specific choice.
Right. It's just a hard thing for me to go to. It's like, okay, what sin did I make? when I was an infant that put me under the sin. I'm not disagreeing with it.
Yeah.
The struggle of it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what sin did I do? Because when Adam sinned, I still sinned. I'm condemned under myself.
Okay, you're talking about, okay, so you're equating, okay, let me help you, try to help you with this. So you're equating sin into an action.
Yes.
Okay.
Based on, we are condemned to hell based on our action.
No, because your physical body doesn't go to hell. Your spirit,
Right.
okay. So it's a spiritual, your spirit is what's born dead. You can't be born dead. Your spirit has to be born dead. So the whole act of salvation, sin and salvation is a spiritual act. Would you agree on that?
Okay.
Spirit with spiritual ramifications, because you're not living physically. This physical body isn't going to make it to the next realm, right?
Right.
So those are all spiritual actions with spiritual residual effect from the original sin that comes to be now. Your imago Dei, your spirit, your image of God, that's a spiritual thing. Ephesians 2, you're born dead. Well, your spirit is born dead, and God gives that spirit life based on a spiritual decision, a spiritual transaction, not a choice in the physical realm, but a choice in the spiritual realm. God, I'm going to give you my life for your life. Well, I don't die by giving him my life. I'm not dying. I'm getting his spiritual life. I'm giving away that which would rule me, Adam. The flesh is what, but the flesh is not this, right? I'm giving that away to get the spiritual life of Jesus. So these are spiritual decisions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not physical choices that you're making. These are spirit. This is within the spiritual realm. So that decision that Adam made, that physical choice, which is actually a spiritual choice, he chose that because Eve was ripped away from him. They were in two realms. Adam was in the spiritual realm. Eve was in the flesh realm. He no longer had a piece of his body, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, ripped away. He had a choice: stay in the spiritual realm, reside with God, go to the physical realm, dwell with Eve. She hot. He went with her. So he made a spirit within the spiritual realm. He made a decision, and then he moved over into the physical realm. But that spiritual realm, that spiritual decision, still results today in us being born dead, because that spiritual piece of him was left behind, and he resides in the flesh. And so the void that was left by his decision of not being able to carry that spiritual imago Dei with him into that other realm, that's when we're born dead. We're dead. We're born without it, because now he's just over here in the spiritual realm. So it's not so much a curse that he's giving. It's a curse of a spirit that has been a living spirit that has been withheld, because he didn't have it anymore. And so we're born. That's why Genesis 4 says that when Seth was born, he was born in the image of Adam, not the image of God, because that image is now different, because the spiritual realm was left over here. So we are all born dead because Adam chose to leave that realm and move into the physical realm. And so what God had planned for us to be totally united with him, now broken. Still the possibility, because that hole is left in Adam. And so we're born with a hole that's meant to be filled with this thing over here. But not until we then make that transaction does that spirit not come over and then quicken us, give us life in the spiritual realm. So now your spirit is brought to life. You must be born again. That life now comes back and is born again within when you say, I give you my life. I am yours. God says, you're now born. Now you're back to where you're supposed to have been. You see, so it's not really a curse of sin of giving. It's a curse of sin of withholding, because he didn't have it anymore to give. You couldn't be born with it because he lost it.
Pretty good explanation.
Jim said the whole other class.
Oh, I know. I keep going with it.
That good? All right. I think I need to rewind that and watch that again. All right. See y'all later. Bye-bye. Take care now. Bye-bye.
I'll listen very closely.
Yeah.